It's always a party at Patchworks. Let's get this party started. Woot woot. Hi everyone, this is Julie from Patchworks, and I am so excited that you're joining us tonight. So if you live in southeastern Wisconsin, you know that today we are hunkering down for a big snowstorm and then it's going to get super cold. But you know what? We have some really, really great projects to get you going and get you inspired and hopefully get you sewing all weekend long. Tonight on Must Sew TV, so you want to make sure to share this with your friends, is we have our Tula Club. So We Heart Tula is our first Thursday of the month club. Everyone is free to watch, and if you are a member, you will be receiving these wonderful handouts and either a fat eighth pack or a fat quarter pack of 8 beautiful fabrics that coordinate to make this month's Nebula Blocks. All of our Tula Club members also receive 20% off of Tula Pink fabrics every single day, so you want to join if you aren't already a member. Today we also have something super special. Our Tula fabric rep, Margaret, sent along some chipper fabric. So this was her sales sample back in 2015. So these are vintage, vintage, vintage. And look at these foxes. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a fun little contest, and I want you to comment and share this video, and someone will be drawn Friday at 5 o'clock to win this beautiful set of fabrics. So good luck to you, and let's get on with today's fun project. So for our extra project today, we are going to be making this project pouch. It is a 16-inch finished block, and it's kind of made like a pillow, but instead of having a pillow, it is flat, and on the inside we have some laminate so that our project can slide in and out. It's a bound finish. Very interesting project to keep you organized for all of your Tula works in progress. Our block inspiration came from the Rainbow Waves pattern that I have provided to all of our club members. If you are simply watching, hop onto the Free Spirit website, and in their projects department, you can find the Rainbow Waves pattern. Let's look at how we are going to put this project together. So let's look overhead and see what fabrics we chose. So with our fabrics here, you will see in our fat eighth pack here, we use a little bit here of one of our fabrics. And you can say, Julie, where did you get your other fabrics from? Well, we used 3 of the fabrics from our fat eighth pack from last month. And this one right here, last month, we made this really fun binder, and I made you get a ½ yard of this to fussy cut. You're going to have a little bit of fabric left over, and so you can use that right here. And then we picked up some background. For the back side of our project, I thought I would use some homemade, that's the homemade line from Tula, and this shows a ruler grid. And on the inside, we have some vintage saltwater laminate that we do have available in ½ yard chunks for you. On the inside, we have some soft and stable, which we had also used in our binder cover last month. Lastly, we used a June Taylor enclosed zipper, the zipper and casing all in one, so all you have to do is tuck in the layers and sew it shut. I could see embellishing a zipper like this with some selvage or ribbon or embroidery to make it your own designer case. So now let's get to the good stuff. Okay, so in our handouts, I give you the list of instructions of what you're going to need. And then I have broken down for you what you need to cut for the one block. And it's probably very hard to see right here, but I have put the pictures of fabric with letters by that translate to our cutting instructions. So we went ahead and cut out pieces. So we have our K fabric here, our H fabric, our N fabric, our B fabric, our Q fabric. Keep in mind the letters go all over the board because they are referencing making a whole bed quilt. And then our T, which is our background. Okay, so we have it all organized here, which makes it a little bit harder to see, but I just want to show you how those all flow. Okay, let's look at the individual units of how we're going to make it. Okay, so this block here and the center block are essentially the same pieces. They're just in different scale. So let's just look at how we're going to put this together. So this is a little bit different from some of our other things that we've done when we're in some of our other clubs. And for this particular square in the square, it's sized right, so it precision pieced. There's no oversized piecing, so no trimming after we're done. When we match these up, I just like to give it a nice finger press here to find my center, and I would do it in the direction of where my fabric is going to go. So in this case, I fold my right side out, and for my square that I'd be matching it to, I'm going to do my right side down, okay? And then I would nest my little crease, pin, 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 and you're ready to go to the machine, okay? So that's my trick on precision piecing your square in a square. Definitely lots of cutting here. On our walkthrough on our handout, we show you that we're going to be making one block 2, and we have listed out the pieces of how you put them together. Okay? We have one unit that's paper pieced that we're actually going to demonstrate and sew for you today because we are on paper piecing week. Ooh, paper piecing week. That should be like Shark Week. Paper piecing week. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so for your paper piecing, it is a little bit simpler shape than some of the things that we've talked about in the last week. And you are going to have a total of 4 units that you're paper piecing to this diamond, like a diamond version of a square in a square. So it's a diamond in a rectangle. I have this printed on Carol Doak paper. I also wanted to share with you a perfect piecing by June Taylor, which happens to be Tula's favorite paper piecing paper. We just happen to have this already printed out upstairs. So I wanted to show you on that. Plus, it's a little bit easier to see under the camera here. The reason why you print on, or why you stitch on paper piecing paper is that your needle goes through a little bit easier, less wear and tear on your needle. It is easier to remove from your block when you're done. And you also have a little bit of transparency on this. For the pattern, you're going to make 2D and 2C units. I am going to grab here one of them, and really it's just the placement of the fabric is what makes it different. So this is your number 1 piece, and when I paper piece, what I like to use is I like to use a little bit of glue and add a 1/4 ruler, a smaller rotary cutter, and a index card for folding back. I'm going to position on the back side, a little bit of glue here, my rectangle, and I'm going to position it over, and I'm going to hold it up to the light here so that I can see it and make sure that it extends beyond the whole rectangle where I need to stitch. Okay, so I have made sure that it extends beyond these seam allowance lines. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare for my first piece. So I am going to line up my index card on my line between the 1 and the 2. I'm going to fold back the paper on the index card, place my add a 1/4 ruler, cut. I really should be cutting away from myself here. I just didn't want to move it with the camera up ahead, up and on top. And you can see here that I've now prepared my straight edge that I can position my number 2 fabric for stitching. So my number 2 fabric, we're just going to grab one of these background pieces, and you can see it's a large rectangle that's going to cover my corner of my rectangle. I can position it right here. And what I like to do for paper piecing instead of pinning is I like to do a little bit of glue in the seam allowance, okay? So it doesn't gum up my needle, it just gives me a little bit of tack. So I'm glue basting my seam before I stitch it, okay? When we paper piece, we sew on the side that we can read, okay? So we're going to sew on this side. And what I like to do when I sew is that I actually make sure that I extend, so I make sure that I go all the way out to the end on both sides when I sew. Before I start stitching, I make sure that I change my seam allowance to, or not my seam allowance, my stitch length to 1.5 so that I have a tighter stitch length so that when I'm taking my paper out, the stitches don't come along with it. So let's hop over to our machine. And I have a handy dandy note here that's even telling me that I need to make sure that my stitch machine length is set to 1.5. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then let's see if I can stitch. Oh, you're going to see me today, so I better not screw up. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so I start behind there, and we're going to use our go button today. A lot of these newer machines have the go button on it, and you can use that instead of a foot pedal, especially if you are quilting while you're standing or for posture. Sometimes I notice that my hip hurts if I'm sewing with my foot in the wrong position. So using the go button can be very helpful for your ergonomic position. So I stitched in white. Let's go over to our overhead here. Probably should use like a black thread. And we're going to just flip this over. You can either use a hot iron. If you're using a hot iron, make sure it is dry, okay, hot dry. This cool tool This is the Clover Roll and Press, and it is rolling it in place nice and flat. All right, so let us just continue with our 3. Okay, line it up, fold it back. Trim. Always close that rotary cutter, even if you're just sewing by yourself. It's really easy to flip and nick your finger on the edge of it, and I don't want any of you ending up in the emergency room, especially on a snowy night like tonight. Okay, here we go. Glue basted it. Let's go back and sew. If I were making a lot of these, well, if I'd be working on the whole project, I would probably set up all 4 of my blocks so that I could more efficiently stitch these units. Okay, so you can just sew, 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 and then you prep, 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 and then you sew, 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 sew. Okay, now this is pretty easy, right? So we're just flip. So now we're going to go to number 4. Number 4, so this is interesting. Okay, do you see how I'm just folding it, it all comes with me because I've stitched through the paper right here. So when I'm flipping back like this, what I do is I hold my fabric and I'm just releasing. Do you see how I'm doing that? I'm pulling back the paper really carefully. If you rip it a little too much, don't fret. Creased that here. So then when I trim, I am going to trim off a little bit of those other pieces. Now, do you see how my 6-inch ruler is a little small? So I'm just going to slide it on past so that I can continue cutting. In this application, the 12-inch version of the add a quarter could be very helpful. But if you only have the 6-inch, you absolutely can make it work. All right, we're going to do one more of this one, and then we're going to do a different color for the other one. So we can finish out our block. I just had to check my pattern to make sure that I was doing it on the right side since I'm just winging it here. Okay, have that all positioned in place. The oversized pieces are not necessarily fabric efficient, but what they are is that, oops, I'm sewing on the wrong side. What they are is it makes it really nice to easily cover the space that you need to cover it so that you have success. There would be ways that you could cut your fabric more efficiently to only use diamonds and half rectangles that you'd template cut ahead of time. If you prefer to preserve your fabric in that way, absolutely, by all means, go ahead and do that. This just makes it much easier for especially a new paper piecer to get in on it. Now, before I got started, I did starch my fabrics because once we trim this off, we're going to have bias all the way around. And so when our fabric is starched, it makes life a little bit easier. Okay, and then for this last piece, we're going to use our fun elephant snippy. I think it's Getting Snippy. That is the name of the fabric. one last piece here. Okay. With that blue, are you able to see how I'm gluing there at all? A little bit? Can see that there? Positioned it. And you can see here how nice it is that my fabric's not going anywhere. So feel free to use that glue basting technique even with other precision piecing. Like when you're working on a square and a square and want to get everything just right and don't want to have it move on you. But the key is making sure that you are putting that dab of glue in the seam allowance so that it doesn't gum up your needle. I think that was the biggest question that I got from my video this past Tuesday night on beginning paper piecing, was everybody wanted to know how I was able to do it and not gum up my needle. All right, so we're rolling this last piece out here. And then what we're going to do is trim it all down. Okay, so I flipped it over. I do want to make sure that with my floppiness, I didn't tuck anything under, because that would be very sad if I would be trimming away and had it tucked under and then would trim off part of my block. So I'm going to take my handy dandy rotary mate here, and I'm going to make sure that I trim on this dotted line, but I want to make sure that my dotted line is actually a 1/4 inch away, and it is. Okay, perfect. If you're using a pattern that does not have a seam allowance printed on it, you have to measure that 1/4 inch, but it's always good to double check, because you always want to double check, right? Measure twice, cut once, something like that. My favorite needle for paper piecing is the Microtex 7010. I use 50 weight thread or a fill. Whatever color you happen to have handy is good. I traditionally use a neutral color, especially when you're using the light fabrics. It is true that the paper will dull your needles and rotary blades. So you might want to have a rotary cutter that's just for your paper piecing, and then another one that would be for all of your other cutting needs. And this right here is this unit. Da-da-da! So I'm just going to move these blocks away. I don't need to make all of them for you. You're going to have these traditionally pieced, and then your diamonds are paper pieced. After your units are together, you'll put it together in 9-patch fashion. The hardest part of this block is making sure that you keep your colors all aligned. So I recommend laying everything out before you start sewing. And that way it might make a little bit more sense as you're putting it together. Of course, if you wanted to rearrange it in a different way, you absolutely can. And if you wanted to make the full-size quilt, the reason why you have all of this color gradation is because you're making a rainbow like this. So we're making that block because I thought that that translated best to the colors that we were representing. So you have your block together. Now what are we going to do? Well, I quilted it here, and you know what? 2021 is all about learning new things, and I have committed to learn new things as well. So most of you know that I've done quite a bit of long arm quilting, but I haven't done a lot of domestic machine quilting. One of the things that I want to do in 2021 is do a little bit more free motion domestic machine quilting. And why not just try with one of our small projects? So this is one where I decided to do that. It is not perfect by any means. And I think it's also important for you to see that we all are learning and quilting, okay? So there's always room for growth. Just because it's not perfect doesn't mean that you have to take it out, okay? Because if we don't try something, we never get better. I just pieced this right on top of, I quilted directly on top of my square of this Totally Stable. So this Totally Stable, like my hands are dry, and I don't know if you can hear it on my microphone here, it is sticky. So I didn't put a backing on it, and what I found was that I had a little bit of resistance and it wasn't smooth, which then reflected in my quilting. So I would recommend that you would put a piece of muslin underneath. I didn't want to quilt through the laminate because that would defeat the purpose of the laminate being slippery for us. So that is my takeaway here, is that you try something new, and if you're going to be quilting on the the Soft and Stable, make sure to put a piece of muslin on the back so that it glides through your machine easier. For the back side, you are going to be layering your back fabric on top of the Soft and Stable, and then you're going to be putting your laminate piece down so all of the right sides are out. You're going to trim it to 18 inches, okay? And then splice it to insert your zipper. I didn't do any extra quilting here. If you wanted to show off some skills, by all means, add some quilting in there. After your two layers are together, you're going to put them right sides out. Trim your back to the size of your block sandwich here. Mine was 16.5. If yours is a little bigger, a little smaller, you can accommodate for that. And then you are going to bind this finished. I did use a little bit more of this fabric that we had from month 1. I thought it worked really well. You could go bold and use a tent stripe. I just was a little apprehensive from being quite so bold. I should take a step back though and allow myself to be bolder. And there you have the fun pouch. So let's look at it from up front again. What do you think? Is that a fun project? It's a good exercise to learn something new, and you can see here that we are just building a collection of goodies to keep you organized all year long. So what else do we have to share with you today? I told you it was going to be action-packed. Well, we have these two gorgeous blocks to share with you today. Those are the Nebula blocks. And with our Nebula series, Julie Herman did release her Block 2 video this week. And the Block 2 video, I'll have links on our member emails. If you are not a member of the Nebula community group on Facebook, I do recommend that you join. Julie and Rachel are excellent administrators and hosts and really talk you through all sorts of difficulties that you have with your blocks. As I was making my block, I would say the biggest challenge that I had was keeping my fabric organized. So you have 8 different fabrics. You're going to be using 4 on one block and 4 on the second block. If we look overhead, can you see my strips here? All 8 of them? Okay. So In the picture, the iris tent stripe appears just as this teal, so it threw me for a little bit of a loop. But in order of how they appear in the pattern, you have A, B, C, D. So this is tent stripe iris, Tula pink solid diva, True Colors wildflowers anemone, mineral sapphire. Then on your orange side, you have A, tent stripe begonia, B, pompons marigold, pompons begonia, C, and D, hexy peach blossom. Okay, so now that you've had it identified, I highly recommend that in the selvage, you even write A, B, C. Okay, does that make sense? Because what you want to make sure is as you're putting them together that you have them marked right. So using a little Sharpie even is a great way to mark your fabric. Mark it in the selvage because you don't want it moving on to, well, you don't want it appearing in your quilt. And this is also a great way if you need to mark your solids. Okay, so if you need to mark a color of your solid, you can put the color right there in the selvage. So that is a tip because you need to stay organized. Out of full disclosure, I did not stay organized and I remade my strip sets. So I want to make sure you go ahead and do that. The next thing that I have found is that we need to check our seam allowances. And I'm looking around my desk here because I had it all laid out perfectly. Here it is, yay! Okay, so with seam allowances, that has been a challenge that I've found. People are saying their blocks aren't coming to size. How do they do that? So we're going to just take a little step back, okay? And this is great for any precision piecing project that you have. So this is a lesson that we have in our beginning quilt making class as well as all of our other quilt classes that we just can't forget about, can't forget the fundamentals. I'm going to have you cut 3 pieces of fabric, and let's look at this overhead. 3 pieces of fabric that are 1.5 inches by 4, okay? Make sure that your fabric is starched ahead of time. Cut 3 pieces 1.5 inches by 4. Then what I want you to do is I want you to sew them together and press them and then measure them, okay? So this unit should measure 3.5 inches. Does it measure 3.5 inches? It measures 3.5 inches. I don't know if you can see that here. Is it glaring or can you kind of see it? Kind of, okay, so it's glare. So this is what you want to make sure that it's 3.5 inches. If it's not, we need to evaluate. Is this 1.5 inches? Is this 1/4 inch? Okay, so when we're talking scant, not scant, the end of the day, your end size needs to measure. So different people have different way of translating and educating that. Bottom line, sew 3 pieces of fabric together and measure to make sure you have the desired amount. If you don't, repeat until you do. And what I would also like to say is that if you are challenged, please, please, please come and visit us because we'd be more than happy to help you troubleshoot where you are going wrong along the way. Remember, we are learning. It is skill building. Quilting is a moment to learn and a lifetime to master, and part of the fun is learning new techniques and how to hone our craft and skill. So that is our skill building moment of today. For our block 2 here, we have our strip sets. We cut our strip sets, and we are going to be using the half hex. So the half hex comes from our hex and more ruler. I need to learn how to stack more effectively when I'm talking to you, so I don't bury all of my work. Okay, so the hex and more, we have our 2 rulers, right? Our hex and more, we get our half hex. And a half hex is a hexagon. Let's put a whiteboard behind it so that you can see it. It's a hexagon, half of it, but it has the seam allowance on the bottom. So it's not just a hexagon that's cut in half. It's a hexagon with a seam allowance on the bottom. Okay? So when you're cutting this, Julie has some amazing videos that I do recommend that you follow. However, I thought I would demonstrate how to cut from a strip just so that you could see plain and simple how to cut your half hex. So I have a strip of fabric here. I'm going to open up my fabric. And one of the things that I want you to know is that when we're working with our ruler, we want to make sure that we are working with it, reading it. We might be tempted to think, oh, well, it's easier to cut in a different way to make because my hand wants to cut this way, so I want to flip it upside down or do this. But what happens when you flip rulers upside down, the print is on top and it's really hard to read and figure out where am I and how do I line that up. So the first thing that we want to do is cut this edge so that we can cut on this side our half hexes. So this would be our starting cut. I'm going to show you using a smaller mat or a rotating mat will help you so that you can cut to the orientation of how your hand. So I'm right-handed. So I like to cut like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin the mat so that I can cut this side. Does that make sense? That way I am practicing safe cutting. I cut straight and then I nubbed. Okay? Now let's rotate it back. And in this case, we're going to be cutting a 6.5 hex half hex. So we are going to roll it back here. And this is aligned to the edge. So I'm going to cut here. I start at the edge. I tick it back past the little area here, and then I finish by nubbing it. Okay? That would be how I get my half hex. If I'm continuing and want to get a triangle, I would cut lining up the edge here. And then I can line up my edge. I'm going to cut my half hex. I recommend for this pattern that you cut all of your nubs off. So you would want to go back and take the edge off. One of the tools that Julie talked about is her mini hex and more ruler, which is a fun little keychain. You can use it as a ruler and as a nubber by taking that point off or taking the keychain off and then putting it up on the edge here and taking off the edge. Okay? It's super handy. It comes with the paper on the back. So in case if you didn't know this, all acrylic rulers are printed with this paper on the back. You can peel it off so that it looks just like your main hex and more, or you can leave it on. If you aren't going to be using it for its sizing, but only as a nubber, you could leave it on to give it a little bit of traction. But if you wanted to take it off, all you need to do is take your little thumbnail and peel off the back. So just that you know, for every single fancy acrylic ruler you have, someone has pulled off that back paper off of every single ruler that you have in your quilting stash. Fun fact. All right, so that is our little mini lesson on our hex and more. We have talked about our project, which is right here. And we have, as I had mentioned, we have rolls of the laminate that we had used, as well as rolls of that soft and stable for you. If you didn't have any fabric left over from last month because you had the fat eighth packs and you're making Nebula, of course we have fabric available to you to make your project. I encourage you to use any fabric that you'd like or other favorite Tula that you have at home. We have our Nebula blocks here. Make sure to pay attention to the order of your strip sets and nub, 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 nub. Also, take a moment and try your luck at the precision piecing test, that 1/4 inch test, to make sure that you are sewing successfully and not going to be frustrated along the way with pieces not fitting. For a futures note, I know a lot of you are wondering what fabrics we're going to be getting. And for the 2021 calendar year, I just wanted to let you know that we have on order all of the new Tula product, okay? So we have all the new solids that are coming. We are continuing to stock the solids. We are continuing to stock all of the True Colors basics. We have an order of line work that's still in the works from last fall. Hopefully, with the next set of deliveries that are going to be made with the line work, we'll be getting ours. Then we have Curious and Curiouser coming. We ordered a lot of that. We know that many of you Tula aficionados are just super excited, like I am, to have great focal pieces like Alice and the Queen. Very fun. We are going to be getting the Mad Hatter quilt kit as well. We have a bunch of these on order. We do have a pre-sale link on our website if you were interested in hopping on because you wanted to make sure that we weren't going to run out. We have Holiday Homies flannel on order. And then there's a new quilt kit, I think with the basics, that's paper piecing, that I just saw. That's going to be late summer. We do have that on order as well. So make sure to tell me if there is something specific. I know one of our club members needed to order a whole bolt of a wide back. So I am very happy to accommodate to make sure that you get what you need. We like to make sure we can do that for you. I'm so happy that you joined us today. Make sure you tune in tomorrow night to see who the lucky winner of our chipper samples is going to be. Some lucky person is going to just have these gorgeous fabrics to make something fun. And you know what? I bet you could make your project bag out of this fun header set. Thanks for tuning in. Can't wait to see you next week. Stay safe in the snow and happy quilting.